Hi, welcome to Talking.Church. We're glad that you joined us again today. And I'm joined this morning by two of the pastors of Family Church that are regulars on Talking Church. That's Pastor Stuart from Portsmouth and Pastor Steve from Havant, both congregations within the Family Church churches. Now, I want to talk today on the subject of balance. You know, being a good leader in church or being a good leader in life often involves being able to balance things correctly. Now, whether you're a leader in the home, sometimes it's the ability to balance what's needed for taking care of the kids, what's taking care of the home, taking care of finances. Any area of our life, there's always a need to often balance things. And now balancing things isn't compromise. Balancing things is trying to get the very best out of everything that you've got to do or everything that you've got available to you to do certain things. So when we look at leading in church or doing church together, we always have to remember that often within church, we have to make the decision that we're going to balance things well. Now, many times in church, you see yourself looking at things going, well, we could do this or we could do that. We need to do this. We need to do that. And in that moment, it's not a moment for compromise, but it is a moment of balance where you say, listen, if we do both of these things correctly, we're going to actually achieve what we want to achieve. Now, balance is much different to compromise. You know, compromise, when we use the word compromise, it's most often in its negative context. When people say the word compromise within church, they mean that we're not doing something that we spiritually should. We're ignoring something that we should not spiritually ignore. Well, that's one definition or one outworking of compromise. But sometimes compromise isn't a negative thing. It can be a positive thing. When we say, listen, we've got two things we need to do, and we don't want to do either or. We want to do both of them well. We want to get this right in a situation that's got multiple expressions. So we're choosing not to compromise negatively. I'm not talking about not teach the word or not teach on the Trinity or anything in that setting. I'm talking about sometimes we go, no, we're deliberately not going to put so much emphasis on this because we want to do this well, but we also want to do this well. So sometimes it comes down to what I've often termed a desire to go for both rather than a settlement in either or thinking. Sadly, the church can often be plagued with either or thinking. What do I mean by that? That we reach a crossroads where we need to make a decision where we've got two opportunities or multiple opportunities available to us. And we drift into this way of thinking that says, well, either we do this or either we do this. When the reality is that a lot of the times there's scope to do both if you're willing to not negatively compromise your values or your character, but just say, listen, let's look at this and say, how can we do a win-win? How can we handle this situation in a way that we're not missing out on something because we've chosen to do something else? And that's where I believe as a leader, whether you're in the home, whether you're in the workplace, in any context of leadership, we need to be ready to compromise in a positive way. Let me underline, I'm not preaching compromise in a negative way, as in what we preach and what we believe. I'm speaking about the management of things in life. But we need to say, how can we bring balance here that will enable us to achieve things? Now, the problem is the moment you begin to talk about balance or trying to attempt to do two things at once or keep multiple groups of people happy, then you always get people that are living in the ditch of extremes saying, well, we're not happy because you're not doing this. Now, again, if it's not theological, if it's not spiritual, if it's not character, we need to be a little bit more patient, don't you think, sometimes with each other and say, let's look at what we're trying to achieve. Let's look at how we're aiming to get balance for the good of what we're doing. Now, getting things balanced right is often the key for me. I look at different things, and as a leader, it's like there's so many times in the day you have to say, well, shall we do this or shall we do this? Or is God calling us to do both? Now, if God's calling us to do both, it's not a matter of either or. God's saying you can have it all. Then you've got to say, well, we've got to balance our human resource. We've got to balance our finances. We've got to balance certain things to enable us to achieve a bigger outcome than just one thing or another. Now, for me, I've often taught balancing what we're doing. For me, it's often balancing the simplest of things like realities and ideals. If a leader can't balance their realities and their ideals, they're not going to achieve what they could if they were able to. Now, every leader, if they're a visionary or have any visionary capacity to them, whether they're leading a church, leading a home, leading a department or a group within church, should have ideals. They should say, listen, in an ideal world, this is what I'd love. In an ideal world, this is what this would look like. In an ideal world, this is what we're doing would achieve week in and week out. Now, ideals are brilliant, but often because of a lack of finances, a lack of manpower, you can't do everything that you want to do the way you want to do it. And you have to deal with something else called realities, where you look at what you want to do. In an ideal world, I want to do this. In an ideal world, we would move forward and do this. But the reality is, because of the other things we're committed to, because of the finances, because of manpower, any of these other variables, we can't do what we want to do exactly, but equally we're not going to quit on the thought. We're going to do what we can. Again, there's a difference between excellence and perfection. Perfection is often trying to do something you want to do when you can't do it, trying to do something you want to do when you can't afford it. Where excellence says, come on, let's do the very best with what we are and what we have. And I believe that God requires of us an excellent spirit, not so much of a spirit of a perfectionist. So for me, I'm constantly in this equation of I'm full of dreams. I know my ideals. I know what I would like. I know what God's calling me to do. I know what I would like that to look like. There's my ideals. And then I have my realities. This is what we've got to spend. This is what people are already doing. This is what we're capable of if we don't want to break ourselves. Now, I have to, at any given time, every leader does, be able to embrace my ideals and embrace my realities. And it's the balance between the two that isn't compromise. It's a balance between the two that actually creates great tension in my leadership. Because if a leader is only holding on to ideals, they've not got the tautness of a guitar string to actually do what they're doing correctly. Equally, if a person's just got their realities, they're going to be quite pessimistic in their outworking. Because ideals are really for the optimists, aren't they? In us all, there should always be an optimist. This is what we could do. This is what we need to do. But also within us all, there needs to be an element of a pessimist that says, all right, let me balance what my dream is with what I can currently do to make that dream a reality. What is that? It's balance. Now, there's other times that we need to balance what we want to do with what we can do. We need to balance finances. We need to balance human resource. All right, we've got a job. We've got a dream. It's going to take 100 people. We've got 43. How do we balance out the manpower that's available with the dream that's in our heart? Balance, 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 balance. I want to encourage you today to look at your life and say, where do you need to not settle for either or thinking? Where is there room for doing both? And where do you need to embrace your realities and your ideals to achieve such things? So, throughout church life, we are often looking at the subject of balance, but especially within our services, what we do. Like, to me, church is more than a service. I think church, well, I know church is a called out people called out of darkness into the kingdom of the Son of His love. Church is not a building, though we need buildings. Church is not a meeting, though we have meetings. Church is a community of people that have Jesus Christ in common and are committed to what King Jesus has asked us to do in the extension of His kingdom. That's my definition of church, or a simple expression of what I believe church is. So when we look at services like when we meet on Sunday, we always have to walk with wisdom to look at how we need to balance things so that we don't achieve a singular result, but a multiple success. Again, that's not compromise. That's not saying we won't preach that because we're scared of what people say. We're not going to mention this. We're not going to speak in tongues because that might spook people. I'm not saying to compromise in that manner at all. We need to be true to the things that we believe. But we do need to be conscious in our mind that there's things we need to do when we meet together, but there's also other things we need to do when we meet together. It's like when you meet some Christians, they say, all right, church on Sunday should just be about teaching the word. Well, no, it also needs to be about fellowship. It also needs to be about, the community aspect of fellowship. It also needs about corporate worship. It also needs to be a time of mobilization. Another person would say, well, I believe that church on Sunday should just be prayer. Well, no, you're out of balance. What you want isn't wrong. But again, there's other things that we do in the life of the church throughout the week, if church isn't a Sunday meeting, that can really give more definition to that cry or that desire for worship. But when we look at Sunday morning, and we all have our Sunday morning services, we have to look at questions like this. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? How much of it do we need to do in one meeting? Now, to me, when I look at church, it's pitching our meeting correctly so that we meet the spiritual needs of everyone there. Again, this is the responsibility of a leader. We can't just be thinking, how do we feed the well-fed sheep? What do I mean by that? People that have gone to church for years and they're coming on Sunday morning because they want a deep word. Well, that's good, isn't it? But actually at that point, if you've been saved that long, you shouldn't be relying on Sunday to be where you're fed. You should be in the word for yourself. But equally, I believe there should be good, solid teaching on Sunday morning. Well, you say, well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is we've also got people coming through the doors that aren't even saved. And they need to hear the gospel. They need to hear that element of teaching on Sunday morning, whether it's 25 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever you do in your church, needs to be able to be relevant, applicable to the person coming through the door that has no experience of God, yet also be something that's of value in the life of the person that's been walking with Jesus for maybe many years. So if we're doing what we're doing correctly, because Jesus said, go into all the world, make disciples, we should be representing ambassadors of his kingdom in a way that makes the kingdom delicious, that people want to visit us. At any given time, our success is that we will have people who have no knowledge of God. None. And again, when you look at the generation of people that we're dealing with today, many of them in this generation, their parents didn't go to church. You know, when I was younger, most people had a concept of church because their parents went or spoke to them about it. But we're dealing with people today, this premillennial group that don't have any idea of what church is. So at any given Sunday, if our evangelism is working correctly, we will have people with us that have no knowledge of God. And in some ways, we're spoon-feeding truth so that they will encounter Christ and begin a relationship or a journey with him. You'll also have people in the service on Sunday that have a minimal knowing of God. Church to them, or Christianity to them, is Sunday morning. They only really think about Jesus when they wake up Sunday morning. They're on a journey. And then you'll also have people that have a deeper place. These guys are walking with the Lord. They're disciples. They're not crowd. Their minds are set on him all week. They know the foundations of being born again, discipleship. And now they want to know, how do we grow deeper in the Lord? So can you see the problem for the church leader sometimes is you have this wide crowd of people and your heart is to want to do the very, very best by each of them. And I believe we can when we're not scared to talk about positive compromise or balance in what we do. But sometimes it's educating people, and often it's the older Christians that need more education in this. That listen, what we're trying to do today isn't just revealed to you revelation knowledge of things you've never understood before. We're also trying, it's like on Sunday in our first service, we had 4 wonderful salvations. We had 4 beautiful moments where 4 people that had been with us 1 or 2 weeks responded to start a walk with Jesus Christ. Oh, that makes me happy. The evangelist in me flips out. You know, it's amazing when you say to the church, hey, the angels of heaven are rejoicing after one that's got saved, and their response, it's because they have no concept of eternity in heaven and what just happened. In reality, a person was just delivered from hell and an eternity of condemnation and separation. And now they're a citizen and their name is unblotted in the Lamb's Book of Life. That needs to be of value to the whole church. I want to hear the church roar when people get saved. But equally, we've got people that need to grow. So often, as a pastor, you can hear comments like this. It's not deep enough. Again, you should be a self-feeder by now. But I believe within what we do on a Sunday, there's enough room to have good worship. And again, for us in Portsmouth, we're not putting time restraints on to be trendy. We have caretakers. We rent a building. They give us a set amount of time, and we've got to squeeze into that time, set up 2 meetings and break down. Because often people think, oh, they're just trying to be trendy and sharp with their meetings. No, we're really not. I would love to stay in the presence of God for 2 weeks. If you know me, I'm a presence person. But we're going to get our own building. Can somebody say amen? Amen. But until we do, we've got these limitations. Which means we need to balance things correctly to make sure that the experience of people in both those services is they get an element of worship, they get good teaching, they get the opportunity of fellowship, their children are taken care of. All of these things need to be balanced. And if we don't think balance and just turn up, we're not going to achieve much at all. So we want to be serving all. Now, to correct balance to me is that we're there to reach the lost, we're there to provide fellowship, and we're there to bring instruction. But we're looking at Sunday morning and we're saying Sunday morning isn't the be-all and end-all of Christianity. We have prayer meetings during the week. Now, again, I heard it put once, and I love this comparison, that church on Sunday, as we know, it should be like a living room experience. But it doesn't mean that we haven't got other rooms to who we are. It's like when you think of being fed, that's like a kitchen, isn't it? That we should have in the life of the church, remember the life of a church isn't 2 hours on Sunday. In the life of a church, there should be training, opportunities to be fed more, discipleship, and rooms that are built for learning more. Equally, in worship, people say, well, I just want to just get lost in the presence of God. Well, you're talking about the bedroom, aren't you? You're talking about a place of intimacy. I just want to be with the Lord. That's beautiful, and please, we all want that. But sometimes that can't be everything on Sunday. It needs to be another. That's why we put on special worship services. So what is Sunday morning? Number one, it should be a living room where people come in and they encounter or get a good measure of the whole of who we are. Fellowship, teaching, worship, all the things are expressed in what we do on a Sunday morning. If we balance that well, I think we meet the need of the person coming for the first time, but also the person that's committed that this is their spiritual home. But also, to me, church on Sunday needs to be a net. It needs to be something that we're deliberately casting out, yet we want fellowship, but we also want to catch people. We want people to encounter Jesus in what we do on a Sunday morning. We want people to encounter Jesus in our lives when we meet them throughout the week. But Sunday morning, we want it to be not so high that they don't understand, not so deep that they can't embrace it. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is Sundays, as we build them throughout Family Church and the other congregations you represent, needs to have in mind not just the long-term saint, but the person coming through the doors with no understanding. If we get that balance right, and we're committed together as leaders, I'm looking at the live audience today because it's filled with leaders of children's church and youth and different departments. If we're committed in this common objective, we can do it. And what we'll end up with is not either or, but both. Not some, but all. And hey, I'm kind of done this morning with that thought. I want to now open this up to discussion to two pastors that run church week in, week out, 52 weeks a year. What's some of your initial thoughts, Steve, with this thought of balance and ministry?
I think the importance of explaining to people and reminding people what we've said, that church is not 2 hours on a Sunday morning. Very often when somebody's come to me and had a complaint, if you like, about depth or I'm not getting what I need, very often that person is somebody who isn't involving themselves in any other rooms, any other things that the church is doing. And I find that for people who are involving themselves in the rest of the church don't really come to me and say what I'm getting on Sunday morning isn't enough. And so my first question is, okay, what are you involved in? What are you doing? Are you in a connect group? Do you go to prayer? Have you found out about EBA for us, our Bible college? And it's reminding people, okay, what is church to you? Asking that question of them. Because if they only see it as Sunday morning and they're growing in their walk with God, but they're just thriving on Sunday mornings and that is it alone, then they will feel that they're not being, their needs aren't being met.
Do you find often that the person or the type of person that would say, I want this changed on Sunday, is somebody that isn't that engaged with other church activity in your experience?
Absolutely. And that's why they're missing out on what they need from the overall picture of church. They're trying to squeeze everything into a Sunday morning.
That's it. They're trying to get from 1.5 hours everything pertaining to their Christian walk. And that's never going to happen, is it? Stu?
Yeah, I think there's this really healthy tension between we go into the world and preach the gospel, but also we go and make disciples. And we want to do both, don't we? And I think that we continually have to be tweaking what we do regarding our Sunday gatherings to make sure that we are achieving both of those things within that time frame, but that also people know how to access the discipleship element at other times. And actually, if you think about church as a house with rooms, most of those that come into the house, to the living room and experience our Sunday gathering are those that have been invited in by others. Rarely do people walk in off the street into a home and just sort of come into your living room and sit down with you. But that does sometimes happen in our situation with we advertise, we have flyers that let people know you're welcome to come. So that can be sometimes the hook that draws them in. For others, they're invited in. Most people that come to church for the first time, they're invited in by a friend. So we always want to give that opportunity for people to receive Jesus. But also, as we preach the word, and as we preach from the revelation that God's given us, I believe that revelation is attainable for those that are just starting to walk with Jesus and those that have been walking with him for a long time.
Well, Jesus taught incredibly deep things using parables. Very rarely do you look in the Gospels and see him teaching something that was only understandable by the Pharisee. that he spoke of very everyday things, yet within those teachings of vines and farmers and mountains, there were incredible revelationary thoughts that could be accessed by the person that's just listened to him for the first time. But also, well, he said, didn't he, of the Pharisees, ever hearing, they don't hear.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think if God's speaking through us, I don't think we need to, again, I've often said to you guys as pastors, it's not us teaching them what we know, it's us teaching them what they need to know. Because sometimes pastors can go over the head of people because they, within themselves, they want the people to know what they know. This is what I know. Mm-hmm. But if the people don't leave any different, you know, there was a wonderful man in my life for years, Vaughan Gerald. You knew Vaughan. Incredible. He was like a spiritual father type person in my life. And he was like an Old Testament prophet. We had a very beautiful friendship. And still, you know, with his family today, we're close. And I'm so thankful for who Vaughan was in my life. But he always used to say these one-off statements. And he always used to say to me when I was a young preacher, when you turn up, Andy, you look where the people are at. You don't come over their heads. You come just underneath where they are, lift them a little bit higher, and then you leave. Because then what you've done is you've improved their walk with God, not left them thinking, that guy's amazing. You know what I mean? When you look at how Jesus taught, it was so simple, wasn't it? Other problems, Steve, with, you know, again, I think the root problem here is when people expect everything from Sunday morning, when they need to open up Christianity to be more about their life than a service attendance. Other thoughts on this?
Again, I think not just what we do in a service, but building that community aspect is vitally important. Because yes, you can just have that relationship one with God in your bedroom reading the Bible, but part of why we gather is the celebration, but also the fellowshipping. Yeah. And I think trying to get people, encouraging people to not just come in, hear the service, worship, and then leave straight away. An important aspect of our service on a Sunday morning is the coffee time afterwards, is the conversations beforehand. That's vitally important because within that, it's not just you're catching up and having a cup of coffee. There's discipleship within that. People will share what's going on in their world. People will pray for one another. People will give each other advice based on the Bible. So again, discipleship can take place over a cup of coffee in Javalicious. So for me, one of the other aspects is don't just come in and then just leave straight away. Do fellowship with other people because that's important.
I was noticing, not just after the service, on Sunday, in Portsmouth, we set up church from 7 a.m. There's a team of 35, 40 men and women come out, all volunteers, and we build church together. It takes like 2.5 hours before we open the doors of church to the public at 10 for our first service. But I was watching again this Sunday. It's an incredible time of fellowship. You know, just like the coffee is afterwards. I was watching men just talking with each other about their week, and it was almost an amazing moment of connection with one another that you wouldn't get if you were sitting together listening to someone on the stage. And again, I think with our fellowship, new people that have come through the doors get a chance to meet people, and that could be the thing that makes them come back a second time. Thoughts, Stu?
Yeah, I mean, Jesus spoke about how if we hear the word and put the word into our lives, mentioned this last week, that we build our lives on the rock. And I think that that's one of the keys, is one of the aims that we should always have when we teach the word on a Sunday, is that people go away with something that they can apply to their lives. And I think the fruit of if we're doing that well is are people applying this to their lives? Is it something that they are able to build into their lives? And so when we preach the word, that should always be one of our aims, so that that's the key to real growth, I think, is not just hearing it, but actually starting to live it out. And again, when you preach the word of God, that it's going to apply differently to lots of different people. So those that are new Christians may hear what's preached, and they may just apply one aspect of it that for them is meaningful, whereas someone that's been walking with God for a long time may apply a totally different aspect of what's preached. And we always say that, don't we? You can preach one word and someone will hear something completely different because that's where they're at right now.
And the filter they're listening through.
Yeah.
But so success to us as communicators, whether that's in kids' church, youth, any context, is really that we receive a compliment, not that we need the compliment, I'm just using this as an example, from the person visiting the first time and the other person that says, you know what, I was reminded of truth today. Because to me, actually, with the Bible, do we need to teach anything new? I don't think that most Christians are applying 80% of what they've heard. And I include myself in that. But do we need something else that we're not going to apply, or do we need to be reminded of the simple things? Now, to me, I love it. I've had people come before, after the meeting, and I've had instances where I've had an older saint or a more established Christian come and go, really enjoyed that today. But at the same time, somebody came and they were from the community, and they've used words I'm not going to repeat on TV. But they were top shelf words. That's all I'm going to say. They weren't, and they said, that was great this morning. And it's like, there's a very small amount of religious me, believe that, thinks, oh, should you use that word? And I thought, wow, they just paid me a compliment that something of God's word engaged to their heart, where most of the room of Christians didn't. All right, they used a word that was different. We'll work with that word, language. But it was a compliment that something resounded. You were just about to say something, Steve.
I was just going to say, in our communication, completely in line with what you said about not us preaching just what we know, but what they need to know. But understanding that we're not preaching to one group of people. So it's not middle-aged white people, or it's not African culture or young people. On a Sunday morning, as church grows, you've got, somebody who's been working in London all week and is back after a really hectic week. You've got a teenager who may be going for identity issues. You've got somebody who's maybe getting divorced. You've got somebody whose life is just okay. We're just plodding on through life. You've got this huge variety of stuff. Somebody caught an addiction, and believing that the Word of God can hit their lives exactly where they need it. And that's where we need to be open to where the Holy Spirit's leading us. Yeah. Sometimes when I've been preaching, and we've all had experience of this, you've prepared, but in that moment, the Holy Spirit sometimes leads you in a different direction. You're just like, what's this about? But you go with it. And afterwards, you find out that somebody came in for the first time who exactly needed what. So it's us being open to that.
And again, if a leader's watching today, I know sometimes the tendency can be to bend all of your teaching towards one specific demographic or type of person. Like you may say, oh, we've got to reach the inner city. Yeah, we do. But there's CEOs going to hell, losing their marriages, that are loaded with money, but their lives are rubbish and they're on cocaine. It's sometimes, if we only preach to the people we think need Jesus, we're actually disqualifying the fact that everyone needs Jesus. The upper class, the lower class, the bottom 1%, the top 2%, everyone. So if we're communicating and our thought is, I've got to help people that are in this category of person, we're almost going to alienate. Other people are going to come on in and feel like, I don't fit here. And you didn't tell them that. It's just everything was geared to not them. It's like, really, we should be able to have a car park where someone comes in on a skateboard, another person on a broken down old car, and a person in a brand new Mercedes parks right alongside of them. And they don't feel intimidated because of, that's the sort of church. Because wasn't that the life of Jesus? One minute he's got Nicodemus in conversation, another he's got the rich young ruler. They all wanted a piece of him. The woman at the well, adulterers, sinners, tax collectors. I mean, what a mixed bunch. But he was able to retain them in one group of people. It's interesting, eh? Stu?
Yeah, I was just thinking our program, obviously, that extends beyond our Sundays. It's good to sort of consider the range of people that are in our congregations and make sure there is opportunity for those that are in sort of specific groups to have that opportunity to study the Word together, to grow together. So, if your church has a lot of young people, then ideally you want to provide a program outside of Sundays that does cater for those young people and can specifically speak into their needs. And the same for older people. We have a lot of Filipinos in our church, and so we've got a couple of groups that are that meet outside of Sundays that are geared towards the Filipinos having fellowship together because they share cultural similarities and enjoy being together in those settings. And I think that so even with the whole church program, we have to make sure there's a balanced approach to it. And the other thing I was thinking is that regarding our gatherings on Sundays, I think there are seasons when sometimes you do sort of move towards one particular focus, and whether that's a teaching sort of, a series or whether that is you're more focused in this season on reaching the lost. Maybe another season you're more focused on the church sort of finding and moving in the gifts of the Spirit. Maybe in another teaching season you're doing a real sort of depth, a kind of deep teaching series on a particular subject. And I think it's okay to have those seasons as long as that's leadership led, and it's deliberate and it's led by the Holy Spirit, that we know we're focused on this at the moment, but we are going to move back into the middle of the road, so that there is sort of continual balance.
It's possible with that to keep everyone on the journey, isn't it? You know, when we go into one of those times, like we've been in recently with the recipe, it doesn't exclude anyone, but you've got to be conscious to say, all right, how do we keep everyone on the journey of where the Lord's leading us at the moment?
And sometimes even just reassuring people that this is what we're focused on at the moment, but we will be back on this middle path. And the church that I grew up in, we had times when it felt like every Sunday there was just a massive move of God, where it was just, there were some weeks where it was just worship for a period of time. But we didn't stay there. We moved back to, we want to teach the word. We want to see souls saved. We wanted to see people discipled. So there's always their balance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I suppose the thing we keep coming back to is a person's personal definition of what church is. I mean, however we visit this, we're going to always end up at this key point that if a person fundamentally believes that church or Christianity, responsibility within Christianity, all orbits around this 1.5, 2 hour meeting on a Sunday morning, the error is in that thinking.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we could never be everything we needed to be in that moment. But what it needs to be is a place that promotes, this is what's available. So there needs to be advertising on a Sunday, if you like, of, hey, if you want to pray, we've got a prayer meeting on Wednesday night. We've got discipleship. If you're feeling you want to, like in Portsmouth, we run discovery groups, and throughout Family Church we run discovery groups for new beginners. We've got a Bible school that runs. All this stuff happens separate to that church meeting. We have worship nights. We have church is a busy place. I think that the thing that annoys me is when people leave church week in and week out and they don't know it's a busy place. They don't realise there's so much more to access that could grow them, join them, connect them, empower them, use them. I mean, we had a promo on Sunday of our outreach ministry on Mondays and Fridays that goes out feeding people on the streets of Portsmouth. A lot of people totally unaware that there was a committed group of volunteers that went out and did that. You know, it's like there's so much to be locked in with, isn't there? So, okay, final thoughts. We're going to wrap this up in a few moments. Final thoughts on balance.
I think just all that we've been speaking about, it's being true to who God's called you to be as a church. So that, saying family church, we know what God's called us to. We are family church. We're not going to change it for the people who come in and want it to be something different. But at the same time, some of those people who come in and want church a certain way aren't wrong. They're not sinful, but it's not who we are. So there will be somewhere that fits their preference. And I think sometimes in this whole thing of knowing how to balance, I think it's also knowing not everybody's going to fit with our church, your church, whoever's watching, that sometimes they do fit somewhere else better. And that's not us being wrong, that's not them being wrong. But somebody who, doesn't have an understanding of balance but wants it to be full-on worship all the time with a 5-minute word, there's probably somewhere that does that where they'll fit. But it's being true to who God's called you to be as a leader, as a church, and sticking true to that.
But again, if we're thinking kingdom, which remember, Jesus didn't preach church, he preached kingdom. Kingdom says, if they don't fit with us in our sole expression of kingdom, let's help them
Absolutely.
to find where they do fit. And I love that way of thinking more than we want you in our church because then on our number count this week we had one more. That's rubbish. We've got to care more for the person and go, do you know what? I think we're a bit Marmite as a church. Every church should be a bit Marmite. You know, you like it, you don't. I don't think you like how we express kingdom. You love us, we love you. Let's get you locked in.
And that's why it's good to be in good relationships with other churches. So we know, oh, this is that type of church. And again, not better or worse, but
and
you're
that
going to fit
shouldn't
better
be
there.
failure.
No.
We should say,
success.
do you know what? We sent someone to another church today and helped them grow. That's kingdom thinking, isn't it?
Right.
Okay, final thoughts, Stu.
Yeah, I agree that you have to know who you are as a church. And that reflects itself, I think, for us in lots of different ways, both how we do church on Sundays, but also how we do church during the week and the programme that we have. So one of our big focuses for Family Church Portsmouth, and generally for Family Church as a whole, is children. And reaching kids. And so here in Portsmouth locally, we do lots in the community that involves reaching families and children. And then another one of our big focuses here for Portsmouth specifically is reaching those who are marginalised. So the homeless outreach and the drop-in and the food bank and things like that are really important parts of what we do and what we love to do. And so we've found a couple of things that we love doing. So it's easy to start new things, but it's hard to sustain things. And I think the important thing is that what we do has to be in strength. And I think often it will be in strength if we're doing what we're meant to be doing as a congregation.
Well, there we go. We're talking today about balance and how not just in church, but in life, in family, we need balance. We can't be a people that say either or to everything. Well, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. Because a lot of the time, the gift of what God's giving is both. But God wants you to enjoy more than one thing. But more than one thing can actually cause an incredible reaction that gives you a better experience. But to think that way, we need to always think, am I going to be a good balancer? And specifically today, we've been looking at church and specifically zooming in even further on our Sunday service. So maybe you're watching this as a leader and you say, yeah, that's some good thought. Well, I want to encourage you to share it with your teams. Maybe share this video. Maybe you're watching and you would label yourself a church attender. Then the obvious message today is stop seeing church as something that happens on Sunday and begin to look for what you believe you need more of and engage with what the church is doing relevant to that outside of Sunday meetings. But again, one of the things that we shout out on Family Church platform is that we want you to be a devotional people. To me, what we do on Sunday needs to be a celebration of life's lived well with Jesus throughout the week. And it's amazing how many people don't have a devotional life. We want to encourage you, make sure you have a devotional life. That's not religious prayer. That's not like hours spent like a monk. It's just including God in your day, including a God thought in your day. We have a resource available, and here's the book, but I'm actually not pushing the book today. If you want a book, we have got a book called Breakfast of Champions, Volume 2, which means there's Volume 1. And that's a daily devotional for people that want to read midweek. But the good news is we also provide Breakfast of Champions as a free midweek daily email to you. It will come, all you need to do is sign up, and it will come to your email or to the gadget that you're using every day. Olivia's writing some at the moment, and this morning I read Olivia's and I thought, wow, that was great. It gave me a thought. It really did me good. Right. So I want to encourage you and just advertise for a moment, not just the book, but mainly the website. If you've never signed up to Breakfast of Champions, it's a gift from us to you. It's a free devotional. All you need to do is go to breakfastofchampions.co.uk. breakfastofchampions.co.uk. There's a free sign up, and then you will get this devotional as a nutritious gift, a spiritually nutritious gift from us to you each day during the week. And we want that to be a blessing. So again, if you could spread the word, that would be cool. Well, I think we're done today. Thank you, Stuart and Steve, and thank you for watching. Feel free to share this with your friends and your church community. We'll see you the same time, same place next week. God bless.